The Victorian era is often enshrined in our imagination as a period of unmatched refinement. We envision elegant parlors, lush velvet, and a genteel lifestyle defined by grace. However, this romanticized veneer obscures a sobering reality. Beneath their ornate facades, these grand architectural icons were, for those who lived within them, essentially frozen, soot-choked, and labor-intensive labyrinths. They were not homes built for human comfort. They were stages constructed for the relentless pursuit of social status. 5. The thermal paradox. The most immediate failure of the Victorian mansion was its inability to manage basic temperature. In a modern residence, we expect consistent warmth. In a Victorian home, the environment was a volatile landscape of extremes. The hearth was the heartbeat of the home, yet it was a masterclass in inefficiency. Because Victorian fireplaces were open to the chimney, they acted as massive ventilation pumps, dragging cold air from the exterior through every crack in the masonry. This meant that while the air immediately in front of a roaring fire might be sweltering, the rest of the room remained frigid. A resident could be roasting on one side while their back was exposed to a piercing draft. This thermal instability extended to the very architecture. High ceilings, intended to convey grandeur, were a disaster for thermodynamics. Heat rises in these high-ceilinged galleries. The warmth generated by coal fires uselessly pooled near the ceiling, leaving the inhabitants shivering on the floor below. Bedrooms were perhaps the most brutal spaces. In many grand homes, they were left unheated entirely, under the misguided medical belief that cold air was inherently healthier. It was not uncommon for water in wash basins to be frozen over in the morning. Even the wealthiest, who had the resources to burn endless amounts of coal, lived their lives in a state of constant physiological stress, forced to navigate their own homes wrapped in layers of thick wool just to survive the winter. Why feed the hidden engine? The servant class. The Victorian mansion could only maintain its facade of effortless elegance because of the invisible army that operated behind the scenes. The house was not a single, unified home. It was two distinct, segregated worlds sharing the same floor plan. While the family moved through the grand reception rooms, the servants occupied a shadow world of narrow service stairs, cramped hallways, and dark basements. The sheer volume of labor required to sustain the mansion's illusion was staggering. Every aspect of the gracious life was the result of hours of back-breaking work. The scullery maids, who occupied the lowest rung of this hierarchy, spent their days in cold, damp basements, washing mountains of dishes by hand in water that was rarely warm. Their labor was hidden so that the family could maintain the polite fiction that meals and clean linens simply appeared. The servants were expected to be invisible, silent, and entirely subservient, often turning their backs or facing the wall when a member of the family passed through a corridor. 5. The illusion of cleanliness. We often think of Victorian homes as impeccably maintained, yet the reality was a permanent, losing battle against filth. The enemy was soot, an inevitable byproduct of coal, burning hearths and gas lighting. This fine, greasy black dust settled on every surface, embedding itself in the elaborate moldings, the thick carpets, and the heavy velvet curtains that were so prized by the era's aesthetic. Every decorative flourish on a piece of furniture, every scroll, every carved leaf, was effectively a dust trap. Because there were no vacuum cleaners, every inch of the house had to be cleaned by hand, often by servants kneeling on hard stone or wooden floors for hours. Even the walls were a struggle. Those beautiful embossed wallpapers required delicate cleaning to avoid damage. The gas lighting, which was hailed as a modern miracle, only worsened the problem. While it extended the hours of the day, it was a filthy technology. It produced a constant, oily residue that coated ceilings and walls, requiring them to be repainted on a near-annual basis. The house was a living organism that required constant feeding and constant cleaning. It was a beast that never allowed its inhabitants or its workers a moment of true rest. Famille de vie, the prison of social etiquette, beyond the physical cold and the constant labor, there was a psychological prison. The mansion was a theater where every occupant had a role to play, and the rules of the script were rigid. The social hierarchy was enforced through the very layout of the rooms. The drawing room was for formal reception, the library was for the men, and the morning room was for the lady of the house. These were not spaces for casual relaxation. They were spaces for the performance of respectability. A dinner party was a logistical and social minefield. With dozens of guests and upwards of 10 courses, the potential for social error was high. Using the wrong fork or failing to observe the correct order of precedence could cause a lasting ripple in a family's social standing. The conversation itself was restricted. One could not speak of money, health, or controversial politics. The inhabitants of these houses were, in a very real sense, trapped in their own homes, forced to conform to a standard of behavior that left little room for genuine intimacy. 525 The dawn of the modern age, the collapse of this entire way of life was inevitable. By the early 20th century, the economic foundations, inherited wealth and cheap, abundant labor, began to fail. The First World War was the turning point. When the young men who had served as footmen and grooms did not return from the front, and when the women who had served as maids discovered the freedom of working in factories, the mansion's engine stopped. Families found it impossible to staff their massive, inefficient homes. The cost of coal rose, and the burden of maintaining such vast, specialized rooms became too high for even the wealthiest to bear. The revolution of modern technology, central heating, electric lighting, and labor-saving appliances, offered a new way of living that prioritized personal comfort over social display. Many of these mansions were abandoned. Some were repurposed as schools or hospitals, while others were simply torn down. What we truly lost was not the comfort of the home, but the vanity of the performance. 5 A new perspective, looking back at the Victorian mansion, we see a fascinating example of how architecture can shape human experience. These houses were intended to be monuments to success, but they ended up being monuments to the limits of that success. For us, in the 21st century, the Victorian mansion serves as a reminder of how far we have come. We have learned that the true measure of a home is not its soaring ceilings or its capacity to host hundreds of guests. It is its ability to provide warmth, light, and a sense of genuine belonging to those who live within it. We have moved away from the era of the theatrical home and toward the era of the functional home. The history of the Victorian mansion is a lesson in the dangers of prioritizing form over function and appearance over experience. It is a story that should change how we view our own living spaces. We are fortunate that we no longer live in an age where the home is a place for the performance of status. As we walk through our own homes, we might find a new appreciation for the simple, quiet comfort of a room that is warm, a light that we can control with the flick of a switch, and the privacy that allows us to simply be ourselves. The age of the gilded cage has passed, and in its place, we have built something much better, a home. Does understanding the reality of these grand, yet uncomfortable, homes change the way you perceive the value of modern, minimalist living.